When people breathe, typically, they either breathe into one of two things. They either breathe into their stomach or their chest. Especially when we're talking exercise and performance, we want to make sure that you're breathing into your stomach. As you breathe into your stomach, your abdominal wall is going to expand. It's going to allow your diaphragm to pull down. It's going to fill up your lungs with air. You'll be able to get a very good breath that way. And then once you have breathed into your stomach and expanded that abdominal wall, you have all that musculature there that you're going to contract and increase the pressure that's actually in your stomach. What that's going to do is, if he breathes in and expands 360 degrees, and then he flexes down on his abs, all of that musculature that he has through his entire core is going to help support his spine. Now, protecting your lower back, you only have one back for your entire lifetime. It's going to be really important to make sure that you take care of it. So breathing and bracing properly, anytime you're going to do any sort of weight training, is going to be absolutely critical to make sure that you're protecting that low back so that it's not moving under load. And so, essentially, what we're going to be talking about first today is squat. And so this is where we're going to get into the rooting that Dustin talked about. Now, keep in mind the breathing and bracing, that's going to be a recurring pattern for all of our lifts today. But we're going to teach squat from the ground up. So anytime a lifter is, or anytime anybody, period, is walking, they're always going to end up having contact with the ground at their heel. That force is going to run down their foot, across to the ball of their foot, and then that force is going to be pushed off of the big toe. So when people walk, that's how they walk. That's where your balance and your stability is. And those are the same concepts that you're going to use when you root to the ground. So if Dustin wanted to lift up all his toes, you can already see he has shifted his pressure to the lateral portion of his heel. All right. You can also see he has contact with the ball of his foot. Now, if Dustin drives down on his big toe, he now has this lateral pressure that's running across to the ball of his foot and his big toe. When we talked about walking, making sure that you're staying solid, stable, and balanced, cramp while you're walking, obviously that same stability you're going to want when you lift. So, you know, anytime you're going to do a squat, you're going to breathe in your brace, you're going to walk out your squat, and then rooting is the number one thing you're going to be focused on. So, without any cueing or anything else, I'm just going to have Dustin turn sideways. I'm going to give you this, and then I want you to breathe and brace, expand in the stomach, flex your abs, make sure you're rooting, right? He has lifted up his toes, he is planted and back down, made sure the ball of his foot, big toe, lateral heel is all in contact with the ground. And then I'm just going to have you sit between your heels. All right, and then come back up. So in the sport of powerlifting, depth is defined by getting the hip crease below the knee. In athletics, depth of squat is a little less relevant, but there is a lot of data that would support being strong through the entire range of motion. Is going to help keep you safe when you're practicing. So go back down, squat all the way down, show him depth. You can see the top of his hip crease is below his knee. His feet are very solid in the ground. And he has a nice brace, which has allowed his lower back to stay neutral. Come back up. So I didn't have to give him any more cueing than that because he had good rooting with the ground and he had the brace. That's why he said those are the two most important things we'll go over today. That's why she's videoing. But let's say that he didn't brace properly. He breathed into his chest and now he is extended. So as you can see, if he breathed in through his chest and lifted up, now his spine is extended, and then squat down. Because he is extended, he can now no longer hit depth. What happened was he had thoracic extension, he dumped into anterior tilt, so his pelvis is rotated forward, and now he's impinging the front of his hips. Come on. Yeah, so come back up. And that's the importance behind proper breathing. So now, go ahead and turn forward. Let's think about if he wasn't properly rooting. So he braced properly, but he didn't give any thought to his feet. You know, go ahead and squat down and then come back up. So, as you can see, his knee is very unstable. So squat down and do it again. and then come up. Yeah. So without that proper rooting into the ground, making sure that he has solid contact with the ground, it's not uncommon for athletes to have their ankles roll inward, and you start to see a lot of valgus knee.
So I get what you're trying to demonstrate now. So my bad, I messed that up. So what he's saying is coming down, and if your foot's just completely relaxed, you can see my ankle is just flexing in. And as the ankle flexes in, the knee comes in. A lot of times people consider knee valgus to be a problem with the knee or the glute. 9 times out of 10, it's a rooting problem. If you create my arch, you see all of a sudden I can control this knee, whereas when it collapses, it drops me in.
Yeah, so before we started the seminar, I was talking to you, and you mentioned that you see a lot of times with people exercising, they go down, and when they come up and they start to struggle, their knees want to shoot in. The reason their knees want to shoot in is because they haven't established proper contact with the ground. So they have no base of support. They're trying to squat on quicksand, more or less. That...
Real quick, another thing to think about too. Quicksand, we're talking about solid feet, right? No matter how solid your feet are, if you're wearing really soft tennis shoes, right? So think about that when you guys try to come in to squat, deadlift, and stuff next time. To be able to root properly, you need to have some footwear that kind of makes sense as well for it.
Yeah, as you can see, he's barefoot, so he has very solid contact with the ground. I'm actually wearing barefoot shoes. They're only 2 millimeters thick, and that's allowing me to stay pretty solid contact with the ground. A big consideration to think about with athletes is a lot of issues that they run into are caused by poor ankle mobility. So for myself, just as an example, I've broken my left ankle 4 times. I squat and it healed. That heel's almost raised an entire inch, but that takes some of the ankle mobility restrictions that I have personally out of the question. You are currently getting your ankle fixed, but he's able to squat in flats, and that is allowing him to establish good contact with the ground. Even if I'm in a heeled shoe like this, I am still focusing on that same exact rooting pattern that I would always do.
Even if you're in these shoes that are really bad to squat in, still do it.
Yeah. So, if somebody was wearing a belt, a lot of people start to get a little bit lazy with the breathing and bracing, but the concept is the exact same. So, if you were trying to wear a belt for support and you wanted to maximize your intra-abdominal pressure, the belt is just going to help with kinesthetic awareness, or it's going to give you something that provides feedback so that you make sure that you're using your abs. So, I have, just like I normally would, I would make sure I had contact with the ground, I'd get under the bar, I would breathe out, expanding my core 360 degrees, and then I would flex my abs on top of that, and the belt is basically just an extra layer of support. So if you've ever seen somebody lifting in a belt, that is the primary purpose of a belt. If you were going to use a belt in the gym, I would recommend getting one that is the same width all the way around. A lot of people use a wider back belt. It's typical in bodybuilding. And realistically, that's not going to provide the support that you're looking for. The wider back belt is going to take some of the pressure off your back, but it's not going to allow you to get that same kinesthetic awareness with the breathing and bracing. Ultimately, the breathing and bracing is the most important part. It doesn't change with or without a belt. The belt's just a tool.
This is one of the reasons a lot of people come to me and they ask about all the time, because I practice with a belt. If I'm in here squatting, 9 times out of 10 I've got a belt on, even if there's 135 on the bar. The belt may not be competition tight, but it is on so that I can feel. And Sean, you can attest to this. You've seen me come in here and I'll literally go up to guys as they're squatting and I'll karate chop them in the core and trying to get that to turn on. Well, that belt, because I don't always have somebody here with me all the time, I put that belt on, it gives me some feedback on to whether or not I'm doing it right. So that's why I try and get everybody to use a belt. That's why we've got 15 of them on the wall over there if you don't have one.
So one more thing to consider before I actually put him under a bar. When you're looking at the squat, it is multi-joint movement. You have movement in the ankle, the knees, and the hips. Part of the reason the rooting is so important is because it helps stabilize that ankle joint. The ankle joint is very mobile. You can move your foot 360 degrees, got flexion and extension, or dorsiflexion and plantar flexion, depending on how you define it. The hip is a very mobile joint as well. The knee, not so mobile, and that's why you have to take care of it. So maximizing tension in your feet is going to help stabilize the ankle, and then maximizing tension in the musculature around your hips is going to help stabilize your hips. So if you're looking at the muscles in your knee and you're looking at the muscles in your hips, which muscles are bigger? Yeah, your hip muscles
bigger,
are
right?
way bigger. And so those are going to end up carrying most of the load when you squat. Now, when I told him to squat, I didn't tell him break at the hips. I didn't tell him break at the knees. Those both have flaws. You know, if you break at the hips, you're just going to end up bending over. If you just break at the knees, you're going to run out of movement very quickly.
It's also, if you're paying attention, it also throws his rooting off completely.
Yeah.
So just trying to sit my hips back, literally see that. I'm counterbalancing, so my toes are coming off the ground, so I'm no longer braced. Here, my heels are trying to come off the ground because my ankles have ran out of flexion. So the only option I've got from this point is to either raise my heels up or to come back into some type of neutrality.
Yeah. So for most people, I'm not going to recommend break at the hips or break at the knees. I'm just going to tell them to sit down and stand back up. So it's really that simple. Keep that cue in mind when you're going through a squat yourself. If you walked out, you're under a bar, and you focused on your footing, and you focused on your bracing, and you know that your core is in a good position, and you know that your feet are in a good position, most of the time you're going to be good just to sit down and stand back up. So let's go ahead and get underneath the barbell.
Is there a general rule on how wide your base should be?
So for general athletic purposes, I would recommend most people start with around shoulder width or slightly wider than shoulder width.
Do you want me to stop and restart?
How